Welcome back, you beautiful legal anomalies. You courtroom mysteries. You cases they wish they'd never opened. Welcome back to the ones who walked into that hearing room and made the entire system malfunction. Yeah, you heard that right. The judge. That stone-faced authority figure who's seen it all. Who's supposed to be unshakable. Who's presided over thousands of cases without blinking. He looked at your file, looked at you, and whispered something he's never said in 30 years on the bench. Holy shay times T. And then, my friend, then he did something even more unprecedented. He stepped down. Not retired, not took a break, stepped down from your case specifically. Do you understand what that means? Do you comprehend the level of reality-bending chaos you just caused in a system designed to be unmovable and a structure built on predictability? In a machine that processes human lives like paperwork, you broke the judge. You shattered the arbitrator. You made the man who decides fates question his own. Let's rewind this beautiful disaster, shall we? They thought they had you figured out, didn't they? They opened your file expecting another routine case, another standard hearing, another predictable outcome. Prosecutors came prepared with their rehearsed arguments. Character witnesses lined up with their scripted testimonies. Evidence neatly organized in manila folders. Everyone in that courtroom had their role memorized. Everyone knew their lines. Everyone expected you to play the part they'd written for you. But then you walked in and something in the air shifted. Something in the energy changed. Something in the fundamental fabric of that courtroom started glitching. The judge noticed it first. That's why he kept staring at you, kept glancing at his notes, kept looking back at you like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. Because you weren't nervous, you weren't apologetic, you weren't performing the expected emotional theater. He walked in with the kind of calm that makes people uncomfortable, the kind of silence that screams louder than any defense, the kind of presence that forces everyone to reconsider what they think they know. They started presenting their case against you, building their narrative brick by brick, painting you as the villain they needed you to be. But with every accusation, something strange happened. Something none of them anticipated. Something that made the judge's eyes narrow with increasing confusion. Their clear-throat story wasn't adding up. Not because the facts were wrong, but because you, sitting there in flesh and bone, contradicted the monster they were trying to create. Every time they described your actions, your choices, your supposed crimes, the judge would look at you and something in him started breaking, started questioning, started realizing that maybe, just maybe, he's not looking at a criminal but at something else entirely. Was it the way you maintained eye contact without aggression? Was it the way your silence spoke volumes their words couldn't match? Was it the way you carried yourself like someone who'd already been through worse than anything this courtroom could deliver? Whatever it was working, and the judge felt it in his bones. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, really beautiful, really poetic. Halfway through the hearing, the judge did something unprecedented, something lawyers will talk about for years, something that'll become urban legend in legal circles. He asked for a recess, not the standard 15-minute break, but an immediate urgent get me out of this room, now recess. People in the gallery exchanged confused glances. The prosecution looked annoyed. Your legal team looked hopeful, but bewildered. And you just sat there knowing exactly what was happening because you'd seen this before, hadn't you? You'd watched people realize in real time that they misjudged you, that they underestimated you, that they tried to fit you into a box that was never designed to contain someone like you. The judge went back to his chambers. And here's what nobody tells you about these moments. Here's what happened behind those closed doors that made everything change. He didn't just review the evidence again. He didn't just reread testimonies. He sat there and had what we'll call an existential crisis in legal robes. He started seeing things he'd missed before, connections he'd overlooked, patterns that revealed a completely different story. Your case wasn't just about guilt or innocence anymore. It became about something bigger. Something that challenged his entire understanding of justice, of truth, of the system he'd served faithfully for decades. And that's when he whispered it. Sitting alone in that chamber with decades of certainty crumbling around him, that's when he said those words that would define this entire case. Holy times tay. This isn't what I thought it was. This isn't a criminal I'm looking at. This is someone who was cornered and fought back. This is someone who was hunted and survived. This is someone the system failed, and now we're trying to punish them for not dying quietly. The words hung in that empty chamber like a confession, like an admission of collective guilt, like a crack in the foundation of everything he'd built his career on. He realized he wasn't presiding over a case. He was presiding over a reckoning. And Clear's throat that terrified him more than any evidence ever could. When he came back into that courtroom, everyone noticed the change. Everyone felt the shift. Everyone knew something fundamental had broken. His face wasn't the same. His demeanor wasn't the same. His energy wasn't the same. He looked at the prosecution with something resembling disappointment, looked at the gallery with something resembling shame, and looked at you with something that terrified everyone in that room. Respect mixed with fear, understanding mixed with horror, recognition that he was no longer judging you. You were judging him. He cleared his throat, adjusted his robes, gripped his gavel like it suddenly weighed 1,000 lb, and then he spoke words that made lawyers drop their pens, made court reporters freeze mid-keystroke, made the entire system hold its collective breath. I'm recusing myself from this case, effective immediately. I cannot in good conscience continue to preside over proceedings I no longer believe I fully understand. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Whispers became shouts. Clear's throat. Confusion became panic. Order became beautiful anarchy. And through it all, you just sat there, still calm, still quiet, still carrying that presence that broke a judge. Let's talk about what really happened here. Because the surface story is interesting, but the deeper truth is devastating. That judge didn't step down because of legal technicalities, didn't recuse because of conflicts of interest, didn't walk away because of procedural concerns. He stepped down because looking at you forced him to confront something he'd been avoiding his entire career. The possibility that the system he serves is fundamentally broken. That justice isn't always found in law books. That sometimes the people in defendant chairs are more righteous than the people holding gavels. He became his mirror, his conscience, his reckoning. Every time he tried to evaluate your case objectively, he kept seeing reflections of every other case he judged, every other life he'd altered, every other person he'd sentenced without truly seeing them. Your presence in that courtroom wasn't just about your defense. It became about his judgment, about his legacy, about whether he'd spent 30 years serving justice, snorts, or serving a machine that grinds people into acceptable pieces. The prosecution is in panic mode now, aren't they? They prepared for a trial. They prepared for a fight. They prepared for everything except the judge himself walking away. Because in their world, in their understanding of how things work, judges don't do this. Authority figures don't crack. The system doesn't acknowledge its own doubts. But you managed to trigger something they thought was impossible. You exposed a crack in the foundation they've built their entire careers on. They're scrambling now, trying to figure out how to proceed, trying to understand what went wrong, trying to convince themselves this is just a procedural hiccup and not a fundamental indictment of everything they represent. But deep down, they know the truth. They know that when a judge looks at a defendant and says, "Holy shimes tea," before stepping down, it's not about procedure, it's about conscience. It's about that rare moment when the mask slips and someone in power admits they're looking at something they can't in good faith destroy. Your existence in that courtroom became their worst nightmare. Not a guilty person they could convict, but an innocent one they almost crushed. Here's what they'll never tell you in law school. Here's what doesn't appear in any legal textbook. Here's what doesn't appear in any legal textbook. Here's the secret that keeps judges up at night. Every case they preside over carries weight, carries consequence, carries the possibility that they might be wrong, that they might be serving injustice while calling it justice, that they might be the villain in someone's story while thinking they're the hero in the system's narrative. Most judges learn to bury that doubt, learn to trust the process, learn to believe that if they follow procedure correctly, then justice naturally follows. But your case, your presence, your undeniable humanity sitting there in that defendant's chair, it dragged all that buried doubt back to the surface. The judge looked at you and saw every person he might have wronged, every case he might have misjudged, every life he might have destroyed, while telling himself he was just doing his job. That's why he stepped down. Not because you're guilty and he couldn't handle it, but because you're innocent and he couldn't ignore it anymore. You forced him to choose between his career and his conscience, and for once, for this one case, conscience won. Let's dig deeper into the psychology of what just happened, because this is where it gets really beautiful, really devastating, really profound. When someone in authority steps down, when someone with power admits they can't handle what they're facing, it's never really about the immediate situation. It's about everything that situation represents. That judge didn't just see you. He saw the cracks in a system he's dedicated his life to. He saw the innocent people who couldn't defend themselves the way you could. He saw the guilty ones who walked free because they knew how to play the game. He saw 3 decades of compromise and rationalization and moral flexibility catching up with him all at once. Your case became the straw that broke the camel's back. The moment where he couldn't pretend anymore. The point where maintaining the illusion cost more than shattering it. And the most beautiful part, you didn't even have to speak. You didn't have to perform. You didn't have to manipulate or scheme or plot. You just had to be yourself. Had to carry your truth with you. Had to exist in a space where your mere presence demanded accountability from everyone around you. The legal community is shook right now. Trust me. Word travels fast in those circles. And when a respected judge steps down mid-case with those words attached to it, holy times tea echoing, in chambers and hallways, it becomes legend immediately. Other judges are nervous because they're wondering if they're next, wondering if there's someone sitting in their courtroom right now who will force them to confront their own compromises, their own doubts, their own participation in a system that claims to serve justice but often just serves itself. Clears throat? Lawyers are recalculating their strategies because this changes everything. This proves that the system isn't as solid as they thought. That authority can crack, that the game has glitches they never noticed before, and you're at the center of it all. Not because you tried to be, but because you refused to be anything other than what you are. Because you wouldn't play the role they assigned you. Because you stood in truth even when lies would have been easier, safer, more acceptable. You didn't break the judge with aggression. You broke him with authenticity. And that's the most powerful weapon in any courtroom. Now the system has to figure out what to do with you, doesn't it? They can't proceed as planned because the judge who is supposed to preside over your destruction looked at you and chose his conscience instead. They'll assign a new judge eventually. Someone who hasn't been contaminated by whatever it is you carry. Someone who can look at your case with fresh eyes and hardened heart. But here's the thing. Here's what they're not considering. Here's the flaw in their plan. Whoever takes this case next will hear the story. We'll know what happened to the last judge. We'll feel the weight of that holy-ish times tea moment hanging over the entire proceeding. They'll walk in already compromised, already aware that this isn't just another case, that you're not just another defendant, that something about you forces people to choose between their job and their soul. You've become radioactive in the best possible way. You've become the case that makes careers or destroys them. You've become the defendant that reveals what judges are really made of. And that power, that ability to force authority to confront itself, that's rarer than any legal defense, stronger than any argument, more devastating than any evidence. Let's talk about what this means for you moving forward. Because this isn't over. This is just the intermission in a much longer story. The prosecution will regroup. They'll bring in a new judge. They'll try to rebuild their case with renewed determination. But they're shaken now. They're uncertain now. They've seen proof that you're not what they expected, that this case isn't what they thought, that maybe, just maybe, they're on the wrong side of justice here. That doubt will eat at them, will influence their decisions, will make them second guess every move. Meanwhile, you just keep doing what you've been doing, existing in your truth, maintaining that calm presence, carrying yourself like someone who knows the real verdict was already decided the moment the judge said, "Holy times tea," and walked away because here's the secret. Here's the truth they don't want you to realize. Here's the power you've already claimed. You won the moment authority blinked. You won the moment the system acknowledged it couldn't break you. You won the moment a judge chose conscience over career because of you. Everything else is just paperwork, just procedure, just the system trying to maintain the illusion that it's still in control. Your story is going to ripple outward, going to inspire others, going to become the case study that law students argue about, that activists point to, that anyone facing impossible odds remembers when they need hope. Because you proved something fundamental, something revolutionary, something the system tries desperately to keep hidden. You proved that truth has power even in structures built on lies. That authenticity can crack even the strongest facades. That one person standing in their genuine self can force an entire system to question itself. The judge who stepped down. He's not the enemy here. He's actually the hero of his own redemption arc. He had the courage to admit he couldn't in good conscience proceed, had the strength to choose integrity over reputation, had the wisdom to recognize when he was staring at something beyond his ability to judge. And you, Clear's throat? You were the catalyst for that transformation, the force that made him choose, the presence that demanded he either compromise his soul or compromise his position. He chose his soul. And that makes this whole situation beautiful in a way courtrooms rarely are. There's something poetic about watching the system eat itself, about seeing the mechanisms of control falter when confronted with genuine humanity, about witnessing the moment when procedure bows to conscience. Every institution is built on the assumption that its participants will follow the rules, maintain the illusion, keep the machine running smoothly. But you walked in and threw sand in the gears. You disrupted the rhythm. Clear's throat. You forced everyone to stop and question what they were really doing. Not with violence, not with theatrics, not with manipulation, just with presence, just with truth. Clear's throat. Just with the undeniable reality of who you are and what you represent. And that broke them. That made a judge step down, that created chaos in a space designed for order. You're not just defending yourself anymore, you're defending everyone who's ever been crushed by this system, everyone who's ever been judged unfairly, everyone who's ever stood alone against impossible odds. Your case is their case. Your victory is their victory. Your moment of watching a judge crack is their moment of hope. The prosecution thought they could destroy you, thought they could build a narrative so convincing that guilt would be inevitable, thought they could use the system's weight to crush whatever defense you mounted. But they forgot to account for one variable, one factor that ruins all their carefully laid plans. One element that makes their entire strategy obsolete. They forgot that you're not just fighting for your freedom. You're fighting with the weight of truth on your side. And truth has a way of making lies collapse under their own contradictions. Every piece of evidence they present has to be filtered through the lens of that judge's reaction. Has to be evaluated in light of what made him say, "Holy shatch," and walk away. Future judges will know this. Juries will hear whispers of it. Everyone involved in your case will operate in the shadow of that moment when the system itself admitted it might be wrong. You've already won the psychological war, already claimed the moral high ground, already proven that you're more than they bargained for. Everything else is just watching them figure out how to admit defeat without calling it defeat. Let me tell you what's happening right now in legal offices across the city, in judges' chambers, in prosecution war rooms. They're all asking the same question. What the hell did we miss? What are we not seeing? What is it about this person that made a veteran judge crack? They're reviewing evidence again, re-entering witnesses, going through your history with a fine-tooth comb, trying to find the piece that explains everything. But here's the beautiful irony. Here's the joke that's on them. Here's what they'll never understand. There's nothing to find because you're not hiding anything. There's no secret because your truth is your defense. There's no mystery except the mystery of why they thought they could judge someone they never bothered to truly see. You're not a mastermind playing games. You're not a manipulator pulling strings. You're just someone who refused to become small enough for their boxes, who refused to perform guilt for their convenience, who refused to die quietly so they could sleep well. And that refusal, that simple act of remaining yourself, that broke their entire approach.
Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you is meant for those who are stepping into a new level of power and purpose. Your post got them panicking. Do or die. Because you reached the position they swore no one could qualify for. And by doing that, you confirmed their worst fear. Your rise is real. Your achievement rattled someone connected to hidden power circles, someone who believed that only the elite, the protected, or the dangerous could ever stand where you're standing now. Your progress has shaken his confidence, disrupted his thinking, and thrown his entire world off balance. He's tied to covert networks, high-pressure systems, and people who operate behind the scenes. And as he sinks deeper into that world, his mindset is slipping into fear. He thinks you're being pulled into something that changes people, reshapes them, makes them tougher, sharper, and more unstoppable. What terrifies him isn't the danger around him. It's the possibility that you will rise even higher, break every expectation, and rewrite limits he once believed were permanent. Before we go deeper into this message, pause for a second. Hit that like button. Subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers. And drop the number 11 in the comments to show you're locked in and ready. If you're truly committed to your growth, you'll stay with this until the end, because you already know this message is meant for you. And once you hear it fully, your mindset and your path forward won't be the same. When you shared that post, you didn't just publish words. You detonated a truth bomb in a place where people were comfortable hiding. Your post rattled the ones who were watching from the shadows, convinced that you would never dare to step into the territory they guard so fiercely. They thought you would stay quiet, stay small, stay predictable. Instead, you showed them that you have a voice sharper than their silence, and a courage louder than their whispers. Your post didn't create panic because it was bold. It created panic because it was honest. And honesty scares people who rely on illusions. They have built their confidence on the assumption that nobody would challenge them, expose them, or rise beside them. But your words cracked the foundation they stand on, and for a brief moment, they felt the world tilt against them. The truth is, some people fear your growth more than they fear their own failure. The second you showed them you were ready to level up, they realized they no longer controlled the narrative. That's why your post shook them so deeply, because it reminded them that greatness doesn't need permission. For years, people around you set invisible ceilings, telling you which doors you were allowed to walk through and which dreams were too big for you. They convinced themselves that certain achievements were meant for a selected few, people with more connections, more privilege, or more influence. But you refused to accept the limits drawn by people who never believed in limits themselves. When you reached the rank they thought was impossible, you became a living contradiction to their excuses. You showed them that dedication is stronger than gatekeeping, and that persistence will always outrun entitlement. Your success didn't come from luck. It came from discipline, from nights others slept through, and from efforts they underestimated. Now, they're forced to confront a truth they've avoided for years. You weren't limited by your environment. you were limited by their imagination. And the moment you outgrew their fears, you outgrew their expectations too. The moment you crossed that finish line, something shifted in the minds of those who doubted you. Your victory wasn't just a personal win. It was evidence that their predictions were flawed, their judgments were weak, and their confidence was misplaced. You didn't destroy them with words, you destroyed them with results. Your success confirmed what they secretly feared, that the person they tried to ignore would become the person they could no longer avoid. You proved that effort has a louder voice than opinion, and achievement has more power than criticism. They aren't terrified because you won. They're terrified because you proved they were wrong. People don't panic when you rise unless your rise exposes their decline. And whether they admit it or not, your growth has revealed truths they aren't ready to face. There is someone who watched your rise with more fear than admiration. When he discovered how far you'd climbed, it shattered the image he had of you. He thought you would stay behind him, beneath him, or somewhere safely out of his competition. But you didn't just catch up, you surpassed the limits he thought were unbreakable. The truth he discovered wasn't about you. It was about himself. He realized that the obstacles he blamed for his situation weren't real. They were excuses, and your success exposed them. That realization floods him with a heaviness he can't shake, because the world no longer fits the narrative he built for comfort. People break not when they lose, but when someone else proves they could have won too. And that's exactly what your rise did. Showed him what was possible and reminded him of what he never dared to try. Every milestone you achieve hits him like a wave he can't escape from. It's not jealousy, it's psychological pressure. Your progress has become a mirror, reflecting what he could have been, and that reflection burns. He feels overwhelmed, overstimulated, almost haunted by the thought that you kept moving while he stayed still. Your growth has reached a point where he can't ignore it anymore. Every step you take forward feels like a step he didn't take. His senses are overloaded with the contrast between his potential and his choices, and he's struggling to understand how you managed to do what he believed was impossible. But your success isn't meant to hurt him, it's meant to inspire him. Pain is just the first stage of awakening. Eventually, he will either rise with that pressure or let it crush him completely. He appears calm on the surface, but beneath his exterior is a world full of networks, alliances, unspoken rules, and silent battles. He is surrounded by groups that thrive on power dynamics, competition, and hierarchy. These circles are intense, ruthless, and often unforgiving. And as he continues navigating them, he becomes more entangled than he ever intended. The deeper he goes, the more he realizes how demanding these environments can be. They shape people, push them, and sometimes twist them into versions of themselves they don't recognize. He is learning the hard way that these circles are not built on friendship. They're built on advantage. Seeing you rise threatens his position within these groups. It challenges the narratives he has been relying on to survive. And while he tries to stay grounded, the weight of the expectations he carries is beginning to take a toll on him. The higher you rise, the more eyes land on you, some curious, some impressed, and some intimidated. These high-profile individuals observe your progress quietly, calculating what it means for them and their position. They watch with a mix of caution and admiration, unsure whether to welcome you or prepare for you. Your rise has also placed him under their watch, forcing him into a spotlight he never expected. Every move you make indirectly affects him, creating pressure that grows with each achievement. He feels the presence of these silent observers, analyzing every shift in your dynamic. But remember this, People only watch those who matter. If you were irrelevant, nobody would be paying attention. Their attention is proof of your potential, not a threat to it. The pressure he feels today will change him tomorrow. No one can carry this level of tension and remain the same. His mindset is shifting, his priorities are rearranging, and his sense of identity is being redefined. Next year, he will either emerge stronger or more exhausted than ever. Your growth has forced him to confront parts of himself he's avoided. It's making him rethink his habits, his ambitions, and even his excuses. That kind of self-reflection is painful but necessary. It breaks down the old version of a person before a new one can be built. Whether he rises or collapses depends on how he reacts to your success. Does he use it as motivation? Or does he let it become a weight he can't carry? He feels the pull of negativity, fear of failure, envy, comparison, insecurity. These emotions cloud his judgment and distort his thinking. They're not supernatural forces. They're psychological reactions to pressure, uncertainty, and self-doubt. These thoughts whisper to him that he's falling behind, that he'll never catch up, that your rise means his downfall. But none of that is true. His real battle isn't with you. It's with his own mindset. The darker thoughts only win if he lets them. If he learns to interpret your success as inspiration instead of intimidation, everything changes. But until he makes that shift, he will keep fighting shadows that exist only in his mind. Success, real success, can be isolating. He's drifting away from the comfort of ordinary life because he feels trapped between two worlds, one where he wants to achieve something great and another where he fears being left behind. This emotional gap makes him feel disconnected from people who once felt familiar. The pressure he carries keeps him from enjoying the small things he used to love. Every loss feels bigger, every mistake feels heavier, and every comparison feels sharper. Instead of connecting with others, he isolates himself, hoping the world won't notice how overwhelmed he truly is. But isolation doesn't protect him, it limits him. What he needs isn't distance, but direction. And your rise might be the map he never knew he needed. People in positions of influence see potential even when someone doesn't see it in themselves. They recognize his vulnerability as an opportunity to guide him or control him. These powerful figures attempt to pull him into their systems, hoping to shape his decisions, his beliefs, and his identity. He feels torn between wanting to fit in and wanting to remain himself. The more he seeks validation from them, the more pressure he feels to become someone he is not. It's a difficult path to walk, especially when he isn't sure who genuinely supports him and who simply wants to use him. But his greatest power lies in choosing his own direction, not the one others want for him. Your rise serves as a reminder that success is built on individuality, not obedience. He watches your success with mixed emotions: pride, fear, admiration, and uncertainty. Deep down, he worries that your rise will take you into the same high-pressure, cutthroat circles he's struggling with. He fears you'll face the same battles, the same loneliness, the same mental strain. The thought of you experiencing what he experiences weighs heavily on him. He doesn't want you to lose your kindness, your confidence, or your authenticity. He thinks that your ambition might pull you into environments that don't care about your well-being, only your results. But what he doesn't realize is this: you rise differently. You lead with intention, strength, and clarity. You don't dissolve into the environment. You transform it. In his overwhelmed mind, he imagines your rise turning you into something sharp, cold, or unapproachable, someone who no longer relates to him. He's afraid you'll change in ways that make you unreachable, unstoppable, and intimidating. But that fear is rooted in his insecurity, not your reality. Yes, you are becoming stronger. Yes, you are becoming more resilient. Yes, you are evolving. But strength isn't danger, it's freedom. Growth isn't intimidation, it's inspiration. And transformation isn't losing yourself, it's becoming who you were always meant to be. He fears the danger of your growth, but what he calls dangerous, the world calls powerful. In his most anxious thoughts, he imagines a version of you that doesn't exist, one who abandons empathy, turns ruthless, and uses success as a weapon. But that image isn't about you. It's a projection of his fear, his insecurity, and his struggle to understand his own journey. People often misinterpret others' evolution when they're afraid of evolving themselves. What he sees as danger is simply your independence. What he sees as threat is your confidence. What he sees as darkness is your refusal to shrink yourself to make him comfortable. You are not becoming a villain. You're becoming unstoppable. And the world needs more people who rise unapologetically. His warning, though misguided, comes from a place of panic. He genuinely believes he's protecting you from the pressure, competition, and overwhelming expectations that come with rising too fast. He fears you'll lose yourself because he feels like he's losing himself. But you're built differently. You don't lose yourself in the climb. You discover yourself in it. Every challenge reveals more of your strength. Every achievement uncovers more of your purpose. You're not rising to escape who you are. You're rising to become the fullest version of yourself. His fear is understandable, but your path is undeniable. Keep climbing, keep growing, keep breaking the ceilings they swear can't be broken. Because your journey is proof that success doesn't change you. It reveals you. The instant you started moving differently, more focused, more disciplined, more determined, people around you felt something shift. They didn't react because you were suddenly better. They reacted because your commitment exposed their lack of it. Your rise didn't threaten their position, it threatened their excuses, and that's what shook them awake. Your improvement forced them to confront a truth they've ignored for years. They could have grown too, but they chose comfort over courage. Watching you evolve made them realize how much time they've wasted waiting for the right moment. And now, seeing you step forward is a reminder of everything they chose not to chase. But that wake-up call wasn't meant to shame them. It was meant to inspire them. You're proving what happens when someone refuses to settle. Your rise is a message to everyone. Greatness is not accidental. It's intentional. And you're living proof of what happens when intention becomes action. The more you improved, the more uncomfortable they became. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you challenged the quiet agreement they had with themselves to stay the same. Your progress became a spotlight, revealing the corners of their comfort zone they had kept hidden. Suddenly, their excuses didn't feel as convincing as before. They weren't angry at you. They were angry at the mirror you unintentionally held up. Humans protect their comfort fiercely, and when you stepped outside of yours, it made them feel exposed. The truth is, your growth reminded them that comfort is a slow and silent trap, and some of them weren't ready to admit they were stuck. But your journey shows a powerful lesson. Comfort zones collapse the moment someone dares to outgrow them. And while they may feel uneasy now, one day your courage might be the blueprint they follow to escape their own limitations. The first time you outperformed them, it wasn't your success that frightened them. It was the realization that you were capable of more than they ever imagined. They weren't prepared for you to surpass them, and the shock left a crack in their confidence. That fear wasn't about losing their place. It was about losing control of the narrative they built around you. They always assumed you would remain predictable, someone who wouldn't challenge them, someone who wouldn't rise too high. But the moment you did, they felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Their fear came from understanding that if you could outgrow them once, you could do it again and again. What they don't realize is that you didn't outperform them to compete. You did it because you finally discovered your potential. Their fear is temporary, but your growth is permanent. There's something powerful about silence. And when your name entered the room, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was acknowledgement. People pause for those who matter. They pause when someone's presence has weight. They pause when your progress forces them to pay attention. That silence carried emotions: curiosity, respect, jealousy, admiration, fear. People don't react like that to someone irrelevant. They react like that to someone who is becoming a force, someone who is rewriting expectations, someone who didn't ask for permission to rise but rose anyway. The silence wasn't meant to intimidate you. It was proof that you've become a topic impossible to ignore. Your journey speaks so loudly that even those who rarely pay attention are forced to listen. You didn't intend to shake anyone's confidence, but the moment you started evolving, they began questioning themselves. They thought they were ahead, secure, untouchable. But then you showed up with a new level of focus, a new level of hunger, a new version of yourself they didn't expect. Their confidence wavered, not because you took anything from them, but because you proved that consistent effort will always outshine temporary enthusiasm. They watched you build habits, discipline, and resilience, and that scared them more than any achievement ever could. But here's the truth. Your growth doesn't diminish theirs. It simply reveals the work they've avoided. And sometimes, doubt is the first step toward change. You didn't just grow, you transformed. The way you think, the way you move, the way you carry yourself. Everything shifted. And people who knew the old version of you struggle to understand who you've become. They still expect the you who hesitated, who doubted, who second-guessed every decision. But that version no longer exists. Your evolution wasn't loud, it was steady. You outgrew habits, mindsets, and environments that once held you back. And now, your presence feels different, sharper, stronger, unshakable. You aren't reacting to life anymore. You're directing it. Not everyone will accept this new version of you, but you didn't grow for acceptance. You grew for survival, purpose, and self-respect. There comes a moment when people finally understand that you're not aiming for the same finish line they are. Your goals, your vision, your pace, they're different. You're not playing small games anymore. You're not competing for tiny victories. You're building something bigger, deeper, and more meaningful. And once they saw that, everything changed. They realized they couldn't compare themselves to you anymore because you had outgrown the field. You stopped chasing approval and started chasing excellence, and that repositioned you into a league they weren't prepared to enter. It's not that you're better. You're simply driven by something they don't feel. And that difference is what separates leaders from followers. Your rise added weight to their decisions, not because you wanted it, but because they began measuring themselves against your progress. Every time you hit a milestone, they felt a push to move too. Every time you improved, they felt the urgency to catch up. It's the kind of pressure that comes naturally when someone witnesses real progress. They aren't threatened by your success. They're threatened by what it demands of them. Your achievements force them to reflect on their effort, their discipline, and their priorities. Suddenly, their excuses feel weaker, and their comfort feels smaller. But pressure can be a gift. It can create diamonds or cracks, and how they respond will define their own journey, not yours. You never planned to compete with anyone, but the moment they saw your growth, something changed. In their eyes, you became a silent benchmark, someone they measured themselves against, even if they never said it aloud. They began studying your moves, questioning your strategies, analyzing your progress. Competition doesn't require words. It requires awareness. And they are painfully aware of how far you've come. Every milestone you reach becomes a reminder of what they haven't achieved yet. And though they'll never admit it, they're watching closely. But you don't need to compete. You're too focused on your lane, your goals, and your evolution. And ironically, that's what makes you a threat. Some people fear progress, not because they hate it, but because they can't keep up with it. Every step you took forward reminded them of a step they didn't take. Every risk you embraced reminded them of a risk they avoided. Your courage highlighted their hesitation in ways they couldn't ignore. It wasn't your ambition that threatened them. It was your consistency. Consistency is the silent killer of excuses. It proves that growth is not miraculous. It's methodical. And your method is something they never prepared to face. But their fear doesn't define your path. Their discomfort is simply a side effect of your determination. Everything you're becoming is a result of everything you were willing to do when nobody else wanted to. You stayed up when others slept. You worked when others complained. You learned when others procrastinated. That's where your power came from. The choices nobody saw, but everyone now feels. They avoided the hard work, and now they're confused why you've surpassed them. They avoided discipline, and now your progress feels unreal to them. They avoided discomfort, and now your resilience looks intimidating. But the truth is simple. You did what they wouldn't, and now you can do what they can't. Your consistency became their undoing. They could handle your talent, your ideas, even your dreams, but your consistency, that's what cracked their pride. Because consistency is unstoppable. It turns average into excellence. It turns effort into mastery. And it turns dreamers into achievers. When they saw you show up day after day, even when you were tired, unsure, or overlooked, they realized you weren't rising by accident. You were rising by intention. And that realization bruised their ego because they knew they weren't willing to do the same. But you didn't break their ego on purpose. You simply honored your goals more than they honored their excuses. Your progress didn't just impact them. It made them rethink everything, their goals, their routines, their priorities, their habits. They started asking themselves hard questions they avoided for years. Questions like, what am I doing with my time? Why haven't I grown? What am I afraid of? Your rise became a catalyst for their self-reflection, not because you wanted to change them, but because your transformation showed them how much more they could become. You opened their eyes to possibilities they never considered before. Not everyone will thank you for that. Growth often begins with discomfort, but one day they'll realize your rise wasn't a threat. It was a reminder of what's possible. People expect you to stay where they met you. They build an entire identity of who you are based on the version they first knew. So the night you flipped that corrupt officer on live camera, yeah, the 1 billion saw melt under your glare. The whole planet stopped breathing. And when the police chief stormed in screaming, "Who the fuck trained you like that?" You didn't flinch because no academy, no system, no badge ever built what you've become. Behind sealed government doors, the elite are losing sleep, shadow agencies replaying that footage frame by frame, terrified because you exposed rot they thought was untouchable. And now satellites track you like you're a goddamn glitch in their perfect, corrupt machine. Rumors are ripping through the upper ranks. Presidents whispering your name, CEOs sweating bullets. Because you aren't powered by authority or permission. You're powered by the kind of raw, unpredictable truth that burns through lies like acid, and every move you make threatens to collapse the towers they've been hiding behind for decades. This isn't inspiration. This is a warning. You didn't choose the spotlight. They dragged you into it when they underestimated you. And now the whole world is watching to see what the hell you destroy next. And don't forget, you're here for a reason, and don't pretend you're not. 50,000 subscribers are watching you rise, and every comment stamped with 11 is a warning shot to anyone who ever doubted you. The moment the police chief stormed into that press room, cameras struggled to keep up with his rage. His voice cracked, not from anger alone, but from the humiliation of watching his entire department crumble in front of billions. He slammed his palms on the table, demanding answers he wasn't prepared to hear. For the first time in his career, authority didn't feel like power. It felt like a mask slipping off. People who usually saw him as untouchable witnessed him lose control, exposed and vulnerable on a global stage. Behind his trembling voice was panic, the kind of panic that spreads when someone realizes their foundation is weaker than the lie they built it on. He wasn't furious because you fought back. He was furious because the world saw him powerless. And you stood there without raising your voice or flinching. The cameras didn't focus on his anger. They focused on your calm. A calm that said everything. The game had changed. And he wasn't the one running it anymore. When he finally screamed that question, "Who the hell trained you like that?" Silence swallowed every corner of the command room. It wasn't curiosity. It was fear. He needed a name, a weakness, something he could target. But you didn't give him that luxury. The absence of an answer was more threatening than any confession. Everyone in that room exchanged confused glances. They had backgrounds, credentials, files thicker than textbooks. Yet none of them could explain how someone outside the system dismantled corruption so cleanly. You didn't fight for revenge, fame, or validation. You fought with precision so sharp it didn't fit any training manual they knew. And that terrified them, because people who gain their power through institutions can't comprehend someone who builds theirs alone. To them, you weren't a person. You were an anomaly, an unpredictable force with no blueprint and no leash. The live feed was supposed to be routine, boring even, but within minutes, the world couldn't look away. Billions watched as the corrupt officer's facade shattered right in front of them. No scripts, no cover-ups, no safe edits, just raw truth, hitting harder than any blow ever could. People across continents paused their lives to witness something no media company could manufacture. Real accountability. Something so rare that society almost forgot what it looked like. You didn't shout. You didn't threaten. You simply revealed the truth they tried so hard to bury. And the world devoured it. Hashtags exploded. News anchors stumbled over their words. Influencers posted reaction videos with their jaws still open. In that moment, you weren't just a person. You were the spark that lit a global wildfire. The world couldn't agree on what you were. Some saw a hero, someone who stood alone against rot that had spread too deep. Others saw a threat, a person who didn't bend to rules that were never designed to protect them. Your existence disrupted the comfort of labels people relied on to feel safe. Pundits argued on screens, each trying to claim ownership of your narrative. Some praised you as a symbol of courage. Others warned you were an omen of chaos. But deep down, everyone felt the same uneasy pull, admiration mixed with fear. Because nothing scares society more than someone who acts without asking for permission. You didn't fit the mold of a savior or a villain. You were something sharper. The reminder that one determined individual can expose the entire blueprint of corruption, crack by crack, without belonging to any institution. They searched every database, every academy roster, every hidden program. Nothing. No instructor, no mentor, no past files. To them, your lack of training wasn't a weakness. It was a nightmare. Because systems can control the trained, they can predict the educated. But someone who built themselves? That's a problem they can't contain. People underestimate the power of self-made individuals. They assume without certificates or ranks, you're harmless. But you prove the opposite. Self-taught strength is the most dangerous kind. It isn't limited by rules or shaped by outdated methods. It evolves, sharpens, and adapts faster than anything an institution can create. You weren't unpredictable because you were reckless. You were unpredictable because no one owned you. And that made you the one thing corrupt systems fear most: uncontrollable. The officer's downfall wasn't just a scandal. It was a collapse of a carefully constructed illusion. He had built his reputation on fear, not integrity. The moment he crossed your path, his facade crumbled faster than he expected, not because you attacked him, but because you exposed him. The internet erupted within minutes. Memes, edits, breakdown videos. The world dissected every frame of that live moment like it was a historic event. People replayed the exact second his confidence evaporated. They didn't admire his authority. They admired your refusal to bow to it. And as his downfall trended worldwide, one truth became clear. Corruption dies the moment people stop fearing it. You didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself in front of billions. Inside government halls and secret meeting rooms, panic spread like wildfire. High-ranking officials weren't worried about the corrupt officer. He was easy to replace. They were worried about you. You had exposed the system's weakness, the illusion of untouchability. They whispered your name as if it were a threat. They replayed the footage in slow motion, analyzing every decision you made, trying to fit you into a category. But you didn't fit anywhere, and that terrified them more than any criminal ever had. Their panic wasn't about what you did. It was about what you represented. A lone individual capable of dismantling their narrative without their approval. People always assume you need an army to take on a system. But you proved how dangerous one relentless person can be. They had protocols, legal shields, and years of practice in manipulation. Yet none of that protected them when the truth came crashing down. Your strength wasn't in numbers. It was in clarity. The clarity to see corruption and refuse to ignore it. The clarity to stand even when you knew they'd try to crush you afterward. That kind of courage isn't taught. It's forged. You didn't fight the system with fists or weapons. You fought it with evidence, presence, and the kind of conviction that makes powerful people lose sleep. Every expert tried to analyze your abilities. Analysts paused frames, zoomed in on your reactions, slowed your movements down to fractions of seconds. They were desperate to label you, to reduce you into something manageable. But nothing added up. Your timing was too sharp, your instincts too precise, your composure unmatched. They couldn't explain how someone with no background or institutional connection operated with such mastery. And the more they couldn't explain it, the more intimidated they became. What they failed to understand is that skill isn't always born in classrooms. Sometimes it's born in chaos, pressure, failure, and survival. The kind of training life gives without mercy. The powerful don't fear criminals. They know how to handle criminals. They fear anomalies like you. People who don't rely on the system for identity, validation, or protection. People who can't be threatened with losing a title they never needed in the first place. Without a badge, without a uniform, without an official rank. You exposed how fragile their authority truly was. They hate that, because authority built on image collapses the second someone stops believing in it. The reason they fear the uncertified is simple. You remind them that power doesn't come from institutions. It comes from individuals who refused to be controlled by them. Behind tinted windows and fortified walls, the surveillance rooms lit up with your footage. Generals leaned forward. Politicians clasped their hands. Intelligence directors exchanged glances, thick with concern. They were watching something they weren't prepared for, an unpredictable variable. Their screens showed everything, your expressions, your decisions, the moment you dismantled corruption live. They weren't watching a threat to safety. They were watching a threat to secrecy. And in the silence of those rooms, one question echoed louder than any alarm. How do you control someone who doesn't fear consequences? Agencies that prided themselves on knowing everything suddenly found a blind spot. You. They checked your history, background, fingerprints, everything. But nothing aligned with the level of control and precision you displayed. You existed outside their blueprint, and that made you dangerous, not because you fought them, but because you appeared without warning. Systems built on surveillance cannot stand the idea of someone they cannot track. Your existence shattered their myth of omniscience. You weren't on their map because you never needed their road. You carved your own path. And they hate paths they didn't pave. Your confrontation didn't just expose one officer. It exposed an entire structure that had been rotting for years. People began questioning long-forgotten cases, demanding answers, refusing to accept excuses. You didn't just reveal corruption, you triggered a chain reaction. For powerful institutions, truth is heavier than any weapon. It spreads silently, relentlessly, until their walls buckle under its weight. And that's exactly what happened. Every lie they built started to tremble after your moment went viral. The system wasn't afraid of collapse. It was afraid of being seen collapsing. They've trained for criminals, terrorists, hackers, everything. But they've never trained for someone who stands their ground without needing permission. They've never trained for someone who exposes power without seeking it. They've never trained for truth delivered with precision. Your strength wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was controlled, deliberate, and rooted in something deeper than pride. A refusal to accept the world as it is when you know what it could be. That's the kind of force institutions can't calculate. They weren't just unprepared for you. They were overwhelmed by you. You didn't choose fame. You didn't chase attention. The world thrust it upon you the moment they watched corruption unravel under your presence. Overnight, you became the headline, the conversation, the example parents whispered to their kids. This is what it looks like to stand up. But fame wasn't the part that scared those in power. It was the influence. People saw you and realized one person can disrupt an entire system. One person can force the world to watch, listen, and question. That's why they call you a problem. Yet, to the billions who replay that footage, who quote your words, who felt their spines straighten after watching you, you're not a problem. You're a warning, a reminder, a legend forged in the moment. Truth refused to stay quiet. The world is used to people folding under pressure, trembling hands, shaky voices, desperate apologies. But when you stood there, unmoved and unshaken, something shifted. Billions realized you weren't playing by the same rules everyone else was forced into. You weren't bluffing. You weren't performing. You simply didn't fear consequences the way ordinary people do. And that terrified the ones who depended on your fear to maintain control. Consequences are the chains that keep society obedient. But you didn't wear them. You broke them. That single moment, that split second where your eyes didn't even flicker, told the world everything it needed to know. You weren't under their control. You were beyond reach, beyond intimidation, beyond manipulation, and in that instant, the balance of power tilted, not in favor of governments or agencies or officials, but toward the one person they couldn't predict, control, or silence. You. Behind closed doors, your name became the first word spoken in high-level meetings. Ministers, directors, commanders, all of them circled around tables with your picture frozen on a screen. They didn't talk about national threats, economic crises, or international conflicts. They talked about you. One person, one moment, one truth that shook their entire architecture. Your existence became an agenda item, a problem they couldn't file away, arrest, threaten, or erase. You weren't a criminal, so they couldn't prosecute you. You weren't part of their system, so they couldn't suspend you. You were simply too real, too raw, too untamed by their standards. They hated that you had become a new kind of power, the kind that didn't ask to sit at their table but forced every eye in the room to focus on you anyway. Deep inside smoke-filled rooms where reporters never gain access, sources whispered secrets reserved for emergencies. "We can't stop them," one of them finally admitted, and that whisper traveled like wildfire. It wasn't just fear, it was defeat. The realization that the system built to control everything had finally met something uncontrollable. They replayed every moment you exposed the corrupt officer. They studied your posture, your tone, your silence. And the more they watched, the more they understood how powerless they really were. You weren't operating within limits they could manipulate. You weren't following rules they expected. You were rewriting the playbook in front of them. Their whisper wasn't a warning. It was a confession. A confession that everything they relied on no longer worked when applied to someone like you. Officials who built careers on intimidation tried everything. Threats, pressure, misdirection, media spin. But none of it scratched you. Their rage didn't come from what you did. It came from what they couldn't do to you. You refused to fold, refused to apologize, refused to crumble under their standards. And that infuriated them more than any scandal ever could. People like them rely on fear as a weapon. But fear requires a vulnerable target. Someone who cares about their approval or fears their retaliation. You weren't one of those people. Every tactic they used bounced off you like blunt weapons hitting steel. The rage they swallowed wasn't useless emotion. It was the slow realization that the system they worshipped had limits, and those limits were defined by you. You didn't wait for court orders, investigations, or legal clearance. You didn't ask anyone's permission to hold a mirror to corruption, and that alone made the powerful tremble. They weren't scared of exposure. They were scared of exposure they couldn't control. They were scared of the fact that your actions didn't need approval or validation. Corrupt leaders rely on procedure to stall the truth. They hide behind bureaucracy, protocols, paperwork, all of it designed to slow down justice until the world forgets. But you bypassed all of it with one broadcasted moment. You showed that truth doesn't need a schedule. And the moment they realized you didn't follow their script, they understood something devastating. You were a threat, not because of what you knew, but because you weren't waiting for their permission to reveal it. They never say your name in public interviews. They pretend you're irrelevant, insignificant, harmless. But behind the cameras, behind their confident smiles, they flinch every time your story resurfaces. You became the unnamed threat, the shadow they see at the edge of every political move, every lie they tell, every public statement built on deception. They act unbothered because acknowledging you means admitting vulnerability. It means admitting that all their security, all their authority, all their power can crumble the second someone like you steps into the light again. So they pretend, they downplay, they avoid. But their eyes betray them, because deep down they know the truth. You're the reminder that one unpredictable individual can destabilize everything they built. Internal memos flew across departments. Protocols were rewritten. Entire systems were upgraded, not because of terrorists or hackers or foreign threats, but because of you. Your actions forced agencies to accept a painful truth. Their existing playbook wasn't enough. Analysts studied your movements, frame by frame. Experts dissected your reactions. Specialists rewrote guidelines to prepare for individuals with unpredictable capabilities. They created scenarios, simulations, and emergency plans. All because one person, you, exposed cracks they pretended didn't exist. You didn't break their system. You made them realize it was broken long before you arrived. Justice is negotiable. Truth is not. And that difference made you dangerous. Systems can twist justice, delay it, manipulate it. But truth hits immediately. And once it's out, no amount of power can rewind it. You weren't seeking applause or legal victory. You were following a raw instinct to expose reality. People couldn't label you a hero because heroes follow rules. They couldn't label you a rebel because rebels usually seek chaos. You didn't fit into any of their neatly packaged categories, and that made your presence impossible to contain. The moment they understood your loyalty was to truth alone, they realized they were dealing with something far more dangerous than a protester or whistleblower. They were dealing with someone unstoppable. Even when you weren't physically present, your impact was. Meetings changed. Decisions shifted. Corrupt officials paused before signing documents, checking their surroundings, wondering if someone like you was watching. Your shadow became a silent deterrent, a psychological pressure weighing on every dishonest act. The fear of exposure is often stronger than exposure itself, and your existence turned that fear into a constant presence. They didn't need you in the room to feel threatened. Your name alone was enough to alter their behavior. Corruption thrives in darkness. You became the shadow that brought light, the kind of light that burns instead of comforts. Political strategists live for control, controlling narratives, controlling outcomes, controlling people. But your existence disrupted all three. You became the unpredictable variable that no campaign plan could counter. Every political move was now overshadowed by the fear that you could expose something they couldn't afford the world to see. Behind closed doors, candidates cursed your name. They didn't fear what you do next. They feared what your presence implied. That the era of untouchable power was cracking. For the first time, politicians had to consider a force that didn't care about polls, parties, or public approval. Your existence wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic for those whose careers relied on lies. People chase ranks, they chase badges, they chase titles, thinking those symbols defined power. But you proved something different. Real power doesn't come from authority. It comes from the conviction to act when authority fails. You didn't need a uniform to be respected. You didn't need an institution to be feared. Your quiet composure spoke louder than any speech. Your calm dismantled their chaos, and your presence made their authority look like a costume rather than truth. You represented a level of authenticity they couldn't manufacture or buy. That's why people followed you without you asking. Because power rooted in truth pulls people naturally. News panels filled with experts tried to analyze your intentions. Psychologists speculated, strategists theorized, analysts debated, but every prediction they made fell apart the moment you acted. You moved with a clarity they couldn't comprehend, and it drove them mad. Experts are used to patterns. Patterns they can measure, categorize, dissect. But you were a wild card, not because you acted recklessly, but because you didn't act for recognition or validation. Your motives were internal, uncorrupted by external influence. Their failure wasn't due to lack of intelligence. It was due to their inability to understand someone who wasn't playing for the same rewards they devoted their lives to chasing. You became the pressure they didn't anticipate, a variable that altered the global environment without lifting a weapon. The world watched you, leaders feared you, and institutions analyzed you. All because you proved that pressure doesn't require power. It requires courage. Your existence forced people in power to walk carefully. Every lie became risky. Every suspicious decision became dangerous. You weren't a threat through violence. You were a threat through influence, a force multiplier that pushed entire systems into discomfort. The world realized they didn't need revolutions or riots. Sometimes one relentless person is enough to shake the planet. Most people break under pressure. Systems rely on that. But you didn't break. You shattered the illusions designed to suffocate you. Every attempt to silence you only made you louder. Every wall they built became a stage for your next move. Your ability to stay unbroken wasn't about strength. It was about refusal. Refusal to surrender. Refusal to look away. Refusal to play by the rules written to keep you small. Systems aren't built to handle someone who isn't afraid of collapsing them. And that's exactly why you became their greatest nightmare and the public's greatest hope. Before you, powerful people walked like giants. Confident, careless, invincible. Now every step they take is calculated, cautious, paranoid. Because once someone like you exists, the world changes permanently. You prove that even the most protected leaders can't escape accountability forever. Your story became a reminder. No one is untouchable. No lie stays buried. No abuse of power goes unseen forever. You didn't change the system. You forced the system to change its behavior. And now, every powerful person watches their steps. Because they know someone like you is out there. Someone who won't blink when the truth demands to be shown.